This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. Started the new ceiling by removing the old 1960s ceiling tiles. But first, before we did that, we had to have them tested for asbestos, because that would have been the era that they would have put asbestos in those tiles. We got the kit at Home Depot and then sent it off, and it came back negative. So we started tearing down the ceiling. And what you see here is what they used for nailers back in the 60s. It was tongue and groove 1x6 plank. They just stapled them to the nailers, and luckily we found that the nailers were pretty darn level, so we didn't have to worry about that. However, we didn't get very far into the ceiling teardown before we ran into an electrical problem. And as you can see here, by the looks of it, the guy that did the work, I do not remember his name, back in the 60s, he didn't have a long enough piece of wire to extend from the wall to the ceiling fan, which was where the main power was. That was where the original light was in the living room. And we took the light down and put up a ceiling fan. But anyway, that was the main power. And he put a junction in with no junction box, and it was covered up, and he just put a couple wire nuts and taped it together. Well, if you know anything about wiring, you know you can't do that. So we were going to have to work on that. And you'll see that in a later chapter. But right now, we're going to go back to the ceiling. This is the wallpaper that was on the ceiling, and that's what it was as I remember it growing up. So with enough of the ceiling off that we could put up some of our new ceiling, what we're using is 4x8 sheets of 5/16 plywood cut to 2 foot by 4 foot. Those are going to be our panels. And here you can see that it goes up rather quickly. Once you get the first row straight, you just start putting them up and nailing them in place with our pass load nailer. And of course, we had to have a cast iron grate in place of the stamped steel one from the 60s. And like I said, in the center of the room, there used to be the original light that was on a pull chain. Then it was converted to the fan, and that fan was there forever, so we put a brand new one in. It is not a remote control unit. It is an old style pull chain with 3 speeds. You'll see later on why when we get to the electrical. And as you can see, we've got quite a bit more of the ceiling up and 2 of the lights. Now, you'll see more of these in the electrical chapter, but the one on the left, that is the original lamp that was put in 1941 from the J.C. Verdon Company. And we had saved it, so I found more of them on eBay, and we ended up putting 3 in the living room. So with the wide part of the living room done, we are now going down the narrow part by the bathroom, and that is all pulled down, and you can see all the nailers, and you can see our 3rd J.C. Verdon light. To make sure that we had a straight line from the kitchen past the bathroom all the way to the picture windows, we set up a tripod with a laser, and you can see the laser going down the living room ceiling, and that gave us a straight line so that the panels would align perfectly. And then once we had enough of the panels up, then we started strapping with 1/4 inch by 1.5 inch by 8 foot. We buy them at Lowe's They're pre-primed, and then we just painted them and tacked them up on the ceiling. You wouldn't know that that was plywood after the paint and the special paint roller and the nailing strips, creating the grid. And because of that laser line, we were able to shoot a straight line down the length of the ceiling, and we put up the panels. Now, if you notice in the center, there is a wide gap. The problem there is the original carpenter in the 60s, he didn't get the spacing on the nailers just perfect. So by the time we hit the middle of the room, we were going to be off the nailers if we didn't make an adjustment of about 1 inch. Because our straps are 1.5 inches wide, we were able to cover that and nobody would ever know, except the few people that watch this video. And with all the panels up, we quickly put up all the strapping, creating the grid work, and it's very striking for what it is. Nothing more than plywood and 1.5 inch strap. Now you might ask how we got the plywood on the ceiling to not look like plywood. Well, this is how we did it. From Amazon, we ordered a stack rack and set this up in a corner of the living room. And then we started putting the raw panels on, primed them, and we painted them with a special carpet texture roller. That it's basically carpet that they rolled into a paint roller, and it gives a nice texture so that it does not look like 5/16 plywood. And as you can see, we not only did the ceiling panels, but we also did the strapping at the same time. Doing it all in the living room made it so much easier, and that stack rack made it possible. And then while we were painting, since we were going to do the trim right afterwards, we took 1x3s and we painted them with the house mud that is going to be the trim on the ceiling between the ceiling and the wall. During this video, you may have noticed some rough sections of the original lath and plaster on the ceiling, and I want to explain a little bit about that. When the living room was expanded into the bedroom that was beside the bathroom and the wall was taken down, there was a light in the middle of the room, and we weren't around when the carpenter was working. So when we came home one night and the ceiling was up, we didn't think anything of it. But what he did was he took down the ceiling light in the old bedroom, and you can see he just left a hole. Now, in an old farmhouse, a hole means a superhighway for mice, and they got into the area above the ceiling and below the lath and plaster original ceiling. So they had a 3/4 inch run to go anywhere they wanted in the ceiling. And I'm going to show you all the holes that the carpenter cut in the ceiling to give them many access points to our ceiling. So to fix all those holes to keep the mice out permanently, we heard about this stuff called hardware cloth. It is a metal 1/4 inch mesh that they can't get through and they can't chew through. So we bought a roll of it at Home Depot and we started putting it up on the ceiling, as you can see. So we used that hardware cloth and we covered every single hole that was in the original lath and plaster ceiling, and including the area where the wall used to be, where that was taken down to expand the bedroom. That was all open, giving them access to every single run between the nailers. Now the mice will never get between the ceiling that I just put up and the original lath and plaster ceiling. And that is how we did the ceiling in our living room.